welcome to your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the chief, the happily retired chief, Mark Garrett. And with us again today, what a pleasure again. It is the former sheriff of Los Angeles County, Villanueva. Alex, Sheriff, thank you so much for joining us again today.
You got it, Chief. Thanks for having me.
Look, I have you on because it seems like every other week there's something that, like, you're the only person in the world and the most appropriate person in the world to talk about these things. And, it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. As it goes in Los Angeles County / California, so it goes in the U.S., especially when it comes to, well, a number of things we're going to talk about today, and the least of which is not lawfare. But, going back a couple of months, a story broke about, special relationship between the California Attorney General and the current, and I'll say it, so-called Sheriff, Robert Luna, Los Angeles County. And I read this, and I'm scratching my head about how nefarious things really are in California. Now, I'll say California because, look, he's the AG, the top law enforcement official in the state, working with the head of the largest sheriff's department in the country, kind of behind the scenes. And with that said, I am going to leave it to you to talk a little bit about this, especially how this thing relates to so-called gangs in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
Well, I'll tell you this. It probably would be beneficial for the listener, the viewer, to understand the background of how this began. When Javier Becerra was an attorney general, the county of LA, the Board of Supervisors, and the Inspector General, Max Huntsman, they lobbied the attorney general to place the department under a pattern and practice investigation. It's a civil rights investigation. No specific crime that they're investigating, but they want to see if there's a pattern and practice. Except the only problem was there was no pattern and practice that could be investigated. So they had to make it up. So they had a press conference, and he did this on his very last day in office because he was just about to start as a Secretary of Health and Human Services for the Biden administration. So this was a pure political favor on the way out. And it's to throw mud on the sheriff's department in my reelection efforts. So fast forward, that was January of 2021 when they launched it. 3 years go by. Now we're into 2024. And by the summer of 2024, towards the fall, they announced that they've concluded, and a leaked settlement proposal came out. Out of this leak, it was a document. It was 105 pages long, and it was mind-boggling what the settlement was going to be. And basically, it was a wish list of everything that the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, cancel the contract, and every organization that is bent on eliminating law enforcement and law and order, every wish list that they wanted, they put in this document, and the expectation was Luna was just going to sign it and make it be. And that's how this whole thing occurred. Mysteriously, they decided, well, we're not going to release the results of our findings. Remember, they spent 3+ years investigating the department. Well, they had a bunch of smoking guns that, oh, hey, look at what we found. Oh, my God. Nothing. They kept it all under lock and key. Why? Because they didn't find anything other than the fact that the department was severely understaffed, poorly sourced, with very primitive IT infrastructure that was ill-suited to provide all of the response and transparency needed for all the bevy of, new regulations and laws coming out of Sacramento that are all directed towards supposedly accountability in law enforcement. That brings you to today where we're at. And now the settlement talks is becoming a big mystery now because I think the fires kind of put a damper on it, on where they were going with this thing. But that's where we're at today.
And thanks for the background there for people who don't know kind of the origin of this stuff and really how it relates to you and I'll just say the evil empire, the Board of County Supervisors. That's all there is to it. And these things that were fabricated out of thin air. You talk about lawfare, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, really from your book, which I'm just so excited about. But it really was. We talked about lawfare during the recent presidential campaign, but I think this was the original really lawfare in my lifetime that I'm aware of. I'm sure it's not the first time it's happened, but what happened to you, Sheriff, is really beyond belief. So with that said, I mentioned your book, and the last time you were on He said, "Hey, Mark, I want to make sure people know that I have the book out." Now, I didn't know. I'm so glad. I'm going to put it up right now. I'm going to tell everybody right now, you have to read this book if you are interested in really nefarious behavior by elected officials. Not this one, but the ones that he had to work with, so to speak, in Los Angeles County. The rule of law, leadership, personal sacrifice, struggles, and knowing the right difference between right and wrong. This book is amazing. I'm gonna tell you right now, everybody, and Sheriff Villanueva, I've already recommended this to current leaders in law enforcement, retired leaders in law enforcement, rank and file, line officers, different agencies. I'm telling you right now, I have really been promoting this because it's excellent. I couldn't put the book down. Unfortunately, I started reading it right before I had surgery in the shoulders. I had to put it down for a week, and then I got back to it. But I flew right through it. So, with that said, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go through some of the book, things that I think are so much of it's important, but things that really kind of set the tone for where you ended up, how you got there, and then what you did where you were in the position of sheriff. I want to start with your early life, and there's something that stuck out in that is when you were, and you can go ahead and elaborate on this, but when you were thrown in to a Spanish speaking only school, it's like out of the blue, and you had to adapt and overcome and figure it out, and you did. So if you can just expand on that, maybe a little bit of your background and up to that point.
Well, my dad was born and raised on the island in Puerto Rico. And so when we had grown up in Rochester, New York, which is just shy of the Arctic Circle in terms of weather. And we moved to New York City, to Queens for a year. This is 1972, 71, 72. I'm 9 years old. I'm in third grade, went to PS 154. And then my dad has a desire to go back to where he was born and raised. And he had a job lined up in Puerto Rico. And so we moved that summer of 72. And so my brothers and sisters and I, we were dumped into school in I started fourth grade in Puerto Rico in a Catholic school with the mean nuns that had no sense of humor, and they didn't
By
speak
the way,
Spanish.
they worked at my Catholic school too. I must have been the
Oh,
same
okay.
bunch traveling. Yeah.
Yeah, they have to be related. And these they didn't speak Spanish. The nuns, they were Carmelite nuns, and but there was some lay teachers there. But all the students spoke Spanish, and so everything was Spanish everywhere we went. And the only place we had English was at home, and that was a rule of thumb. The hard rule growing up was, okay, you speak all the Spanish you want on the street, but when you come home, it's English only. And that way, we were able to preserve English as a first language, and then we picked up Spanish as a second. But when we were young enough, you can actually pick up another language almost as a native speaker, which we were able to do. My oldest brother and sister, not quite, because they were a little bit older. My mom couldn't, God bless her. She was obviously a lot older. But my immediate brother and sister, we were like, okay, hey, we want to play. How do we do this again? And it took us 2 months to speak Spanish fluently. 2 months. That's how quick it is when you're that young.
Yeah, you know what? And when you're thrown into a situation, either you adapt and overcome, or you don't. And like you said, it is young. It's easier when you're younger, but still, it's not only the language, but it's a culture shock too. Especially when you're 9, 10 years old, whatever it is, and you leave the only home you've known and go to a whole different culture. And we won't get into it too much, but talking about your siblings, one of the most fascinating parts was the Daredevil chapter, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave it at that. People have to read it, and if you didn't know that this actually happened, you would think someone made it up. The things that you did, and the miracle that you survived. So you have to read that for yourselves. Your parents, because when I was the chief there for the Highway Patrol, I saw you in a number of events, and I was thinking, does a guy ever sleep? You're on horseback here. You're, out there burning weed down in the, Lancaster area. You're out and you're all over the place. Either I'm seeing you in person, I'm seeing you on TV, and I felt kind of lazy because I'm sitting on my ass at home watching this sometimes. But when I look at your parents and what they went through, I can only imagine that some of your work ethic, or most of it, is really based on what you saw and what you were taught by your parents. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's very fair to say. I mean, it was hard work was expected. School, excelling in school was expected. There wasn't like an option not to. And my parents didn't finish college themselves, but they understood the value of education. And for them, okay, you got a high school, you finish high school, so what? You're only starting. So we all ended up going through college, grad school, and everything. All of us, all six of us. So it was quite a. They set the bar real high, and that work ethic. They were small business owners. They had a printing shop in Rochester, New York, and then in Puerto Rico. As a young kid, I learned how to collate and run the staple machine and all that, and make sure I didn't lose my fingers in the process. That's how we spent the weekends, with long tables and rows, and we were the collators, just keep picking them
Yeah.
up and doing it, and that's kind of how we survived in the 70s.
Yeah, and it was a matter of survival, and I know what your parents went through to keep you in private school, and how that was kind of hanging on a string, and it worked out the last minute. But it just shows really, I said the work ethic and determination. And sometimes people, just like criminals, sometimes people are just born bad people. Sometimes people are just born with an innate, ability or desire, whatever that gene is, to work hard. But I think more often than not, it's people like you who were immersed in it via their parents and their family and their surroundings. Either way, it certainly paid off for you. So I'm going to fast forward, and you go into great detail, and it's such an easy, interesting read. All this stuff about your military service and about your education, which continued deep into the time you were actually in the sheriff's department. But I want to fast forward to your patrol time, because as a lot of people know, not everybody, of course, listening, but a lot of people know that your first couple or several years are spent in the jails as a deputy sheriff, at least in Los Angeles County, and then you go on patrol. And the reason I want to talk about your patrol time and take your time with this, because some of the things you describe in there 100% reminded me of my patrol time, the things that you saw. These are the things, Sheriff, that people say, I would never do your job. I could never do your job. And most of the time I say, well, it's a pretty fun job. It's 90%, just having a good time, do what you're supposed to do. And maybe 10% like, oh crap, and a little bit of terror here and there. But these are the incidents that you talked about in your book that most people would refuse to do law enforcement because of. And one of those I do want to talk about, was this domestic incident with the father at his adult son's house and refused to leave. And you got a call for that. I think this was with your FTO, or were you training somebody? But it was a 2 deputy unit, right?
I was a trainee. I was with my FTO,
Yes.
Ray Duffy.
If you could talk about that, and in other words, it's a call. Okay, we're having a little 415, a verbal confrontation, whatever it is, family, so forth, so on. No big deal. And then tell us about the call and how it turned out.
Well, it was the call was a 415 family domestic domestic dispute, disturbance, and Spanish speaking only. My TO doesn't speak Spanish, so I'm the one who's going to be doing the talking. I'm the trainee anyway, so I'd be the one that makes the contact. I talked to the son, who's always an adult already, and he explains, yeah, Dad drank one too many. He's making an ass of himself. He refuses to leave, and I can't have him here. And in those days, not quite like today, where you can't just simply, tell one party to go pound sand, and walk away. In those days, you could. So I talked to Dad, and I tell him, hey, you know what? It's time for you to leave. Come back when you sober up. And he looked at me and just kind of gave me the glance I'll never forget. It's still kind of imprinted in my mind. And muttered something under his breath, looked at his son, and he just reached to his face and he pulled out his eyeball. And we were standing in a balcony with a tile floor. So he
By the
throws
way,
out.
I got to stop you. When I read that sentence, I thought, oh, I guess the oxycodone is still kicking in. I got to reread this.
So we were on a tile floor in a patio balcony. He throws an eyeball at me, but the eyeball is made of ceramic. So it was like a marble on tiles. So it just goes bink, 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 bink all over the balcony. And then the guy just walks off and walks down the street, minus one eye. And it's just, you had to think, you know what? It's just one of those oddities.
I really did. I probably was off my meds from the surgery at that point, but I did reread it twice until my read fast forward. I said, okay, this makes sense. And I wanted you to tell that one. I'm glad you told that one first, because there's a second one with a father and son that didn't turn out so jovial. if you remember
No.
correctly. And this is the one specifically. Those the first being told are kind of the stories about, oh, it's it's funny and it's all fine. But the second one is an example of how things can turn on a dime. You talk about unexpected and why cops have to be ready for the unexpected at every second. So tell us about that one.
Second one is very similar circumstances as the first one. You got a disturbing party who is the older father who's drunk and doesn't want to leave the home, and you got the adult son who's, hey, dad's out of control, he needs to leave. So I'm by myself and this is daytime now. I have an Explorer with me as a ride along, and I had just barely a few months out of off the training program. And usually they assigned a second unit, but we're stretched so thin. That's it. So, figure it out. So
Hmm.
I get the call. I talk to the son in the kitchen of this tiny little apartment. I think like a duplex. And as I'm talking to him, the dad is there. And I talk to the dad and I tell him, okay, you got to leave and come back later on, when you sober up. And I'm thinking officer safety because they're in the kitchen. There's knives and all kinds of kitchen stuff everywhere. I'm thinking, oh God. And this would be the bad place if, a fight breaks out. And then he just kind of looked at him again. It's one of those looks that I'll never forget. Looked at his son and he just walked into a room that was just a few feet away and slammed the door behind him. And oh, so now I can't see him. So I go towards the door and boom, gunshot rings out. And of course, I jump out of my skin, draw down, get the son out, get the Explorer out, get all the family members out, called for the world. The world shows up, and we low crawl our way back in, get to open the door to the room where he had done it. We figured probably was he had shot himself. And yeah, he had a hole in his head. His brains and blood was all over the floor, and he was still gasping. And that kind of routine. That was a pretty ugly, scary moment. And like you said, it's just a blink of an eye, 1 or 2 seconds where you do a pause, and I play in my mind, what if I had gone into the room with him? Would I be now looking at a struggle over a gun with a guy? And so maybe the good Lord was looking after me, saying, you know what, take that pause. And it worked itself out in a tragic way, but at least for everyone else involved, everyone survived. But it's just, how fickle life can be when you're out in patrol.
100%. And so when I read this stuff, I actually stopped. I actually paused because uh, things like this, I said, reminded me of specific days, events um, when I was in patrol, and I really thought about because obviously I know how your career um, progressed and where you ended up as the sheriff of Los Angeles County, and I thought about you know how do these things play into someone who becomes the sheriff of the largest sheriff's department in the country? In other words, into your leadership and how you relate to the the foot cop, the beat cop, the rank and file, because you know that they're likely to go through these types of things as well. It's very important. I start thinking about those, and because too, I rose to the rank of 2 star and had a large number of officers under me. So I just think it's so important for people to realize how these things come into play as people progress through the ranks and take more and more responsibility and have to exhibit leadership if they want to do a good job. Another incident with patrol sheriff that again, I was primarily traffic. I saw people die in every which way you can, but most of the deaths that I dealt with were traffic related, the vast majority. And by the way, there's so much about your patrol. I really encourage people to read this book because with the stolen vehicles, on and on and on and on and on. And but this incident with the mother and the 3 children in the minivan, because again, I've seen that, and I'll tell you right now, I'm telling everybody listening, I didn't have my first kid, my only kid, until I was 50 years old. And I am telling everybody watching and listening to this show, it's not that I wouldn't be happy being a grandfather right now, don't get me wrong, but I'm grateful that I didn't have to see the things I did at the same time as having children. Because I talked to those officers who had young kids at home and saw young children deceased. and saying all I can do is all I see, Mark, is my son, my daughter here. It's all I see right now, and I don't know how they dealt with it. And even having a son now outside of law enforcement, of course, we all worry about our kids, but I think about those things I saw, what the parents went through. So, with that said, I guess in the most delicate way possible, if you can talk about that event with that mom and her kids.
It was an event that convinced me never to be a homicide investigator and never to be an arson explosive investigator. I had zero desire to be exposed to that again. And I went to the call, and the tragedy had already occurred. And just a freak of nature, where a minivan with a mom and three kids, drives over a piece of metal on the ground that jumps up and pierces the gas tank and sparks on the ground at the same time. I mean, you could have tried this a billion times, you wouldn't have done it. And this one time it happens, and the car within seconds is in a raging inferno. Mom crashes into a tree, falls out on fire. The bystanders, I think they put her out. She survives, but she ends up dying, I think, that day or the next day, with like 90% of her body in burns. And then the three kids just burned. The term crispy critter, that was literally them. They look like statues frozen in time, one embracing the other one. And that memory of that, and just thinking of what the mom went through, knowing the kids are probably too young to understand it, but the mom did know at the time. And then the family that survived that, the outcome for them. And in our position in law enforcement, all we can do is try to make sense out of chaos and tragedies like that. But that was an ugly day for sure.
No doubt, and again, I can specifically relate to that and that term crispy critter. And people may think that that's it's crude and things like this, but the fact is, when you deal with her in the medical world or law enforcement, firefighting, things like this, you see this stuff so much, and things can get crass sometimes. But um, it's just an awful thing. But all of these types of events, it's going to set your mind in one direction or another. It's going to formulate something in you, and it's just a matter of what you decide to do with these events in your life. And I may be speaking out of turn here, but I'm guessing, Sheriff, that these things contributed to some of in my opinion, some of the compassion that you exhibited in this book to rank and file, and your concern for people, your true concern for people.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a take no prisoners attitude about concerns. Like, I don't give a shit what you say. I'm going to do what I think is right because we're human beings. And I'm not overstating this. This is why I'm so excited about talking about this book. I wish I had read it. Well, I wish you'd written it years ago, let's put it that way, but you couldn't have, of course. So I'm going to fast forward. There's a lot going on in the sheriff's department and who you're working for. And I guess for me, one of the reasons that I found the book so inviting is because the fact is, I know a lot of these people in the book very intimately, very well professionally, let's put it that way. From Baca, Tanaka, even Jimmy Helmode. I mean, all these people I know very, very well. And of course, the Board of Supervisors, I know these people well. Mark Ridley Thomas, who I said was a felon waiting to happen 10 years ago. Literally, I said, this guy's he's got to be up to no good. There's no way around it. So when I read the book, it's just like, yeah, oh yeah, I'm not surprised. But I do want to fast forward because I think this is probably the pivotal point in your professional life, your career. Kind of just like Ronald Reagan when he became the president of the Screen Actors Guild, you started becoming very active in the union. And actually, I'll let you elaborate on this, but you actually created your own union, and I think that was your first type of proper kind of in your face decision you made, and to take matters into your own hands, if I may say so. So I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, no. 98 lads endorsed the dead guy, Sherman Block, and they had a moment etched in everyone's memory where the Board of Supervisors, ALAD's Board of Directors, they all circled the bandwagon, or circled the wagon, so to speak, around a dead candidate who was incumbent, Sherman Block. And I was already volunteering for.
By the way, Sheriff, do you want to talk about a little background? Of course, I know what you're talking about. Do you want to explain that, the dead candidate, a little bit?
Yeah, well, in 1998, there was a runoff for the sheriff's race, and Lee Baca had forced Sherman Block into a runoff. There was 4 candidates in the primary, 2 advanced, Block being one, and he already had health issues. He was 72 at the time, and he was on kidney dialysis. He had braces for his knees, so he was kind of a walking medical marvel. And about 10 days out, supposedly he suffers a slip and a fall in his bathtub. And this is where it gets really, really weird. He was actually pretty sure he was dead at that point, but he was kept alive for about 7 days. And then the Times or his campaign team said, "Oh, he's just laughing and reading the newspaper, laughing about his predicament." He was brain dead. And so his campaign got renamed the Weekend at Bernie's campaign, because what they were trying to do is they're trying to basically get a dead guy across the finish line. And it fell apart because Jimmy Hummel, in fact, himself, he was working as a deputy at Sheriff's Information Bureau. He said, "I'm not going to go with this charade anymore. I'm calling it." So that's where that press conference was hastily assembled, and everybody rallied behind now the dead candidate. And it was strange. He actually, from the information I had doing door knocks for Baca, that he was going to lose in a landslide. He actually improved about 3 percentage points by virtue of dying. There was a sympathy shift slightly towards him. Not enough because he was so far in the hole, but that's how it was, how strange it was in 98. And A-Lads was the one that was supporting Block, but all of the membership, we were tired of Block, and we were tired of his undersheriff, a guy named Mike Graham. I don't know if you remember that name.
I don't remember Mike Graham.
Yes, his apostles or disciples were called Graham crackers, and they pushed for the deputy, the 2-step or the bifurcated dual track deputy system, which we thought was an absolute idiocy, and it turned out to be, it was a really bad idea. So when ALAS pushed for that, I got involved in, hey, wait a minute, I'm an ALAS member, I'm paying dues, why are you doing something against what the membership wants? And then the ALAS director said, well, it's because we can, and we represent the union. Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I'm a dues paying member. How are you spending my dues money? Well, you don't get to see that. I said, really? And that became, basically, we started pulling on a thread in unraveling what ALADS was doing. So they kicked me out of ALADS, and I already had a group of people that were in agreement with me. So when they kicked me out of ALADS, we formed another union named LASPA. And that was in 1999. You want to talk about going full circle. Today, I was at a press conference at LASPA headquarters where they were rallying in support of the Deputy Trevor Kirk, who was unfairly convicted in federal court. Talk about going full circle. 26 years later, there we are with LASPA. They're still going strong, and they're representing Trevor Kirk. And that was, I guess, the first leadership role I took, because I became the founding president of LASPA and dedicating just to represent employees wherever that took us.
Well, it's pivotal because not only, it's one thing to get involved in the union, maybe become a union representative, things like this, which is that's all fine and good, but to actually oppose an existing organization and one that never had any opposition, I mean, at least to my knowledge, is something else. One of the things you talked about there in the book is when the ALADS representative or representatives, just so you know, you can't see how we spend your money. In other words, it was arrogance, and there's an arrogant thread you talk about. Not specifically, but there's a theme of that throughout the book, especially the second half of the book, I'd say, and what we're about ready to get in here too. You know, thumbing noses up at people like you. No, you're not part of the establishment. You have no business in here. You don't know what you're doing. We're the experts. We'll handle this. No, you can't see how we spend your money. And these things encourage people like you who have vision, who are who really have courage and a work ethic. Say, okay, fine. If you don't want us to play in your game, we're going to start our own game. And this is exactly what you do. And this kind of brings us up to the 2018 election, and that that chapter, if I remember correctly, is David versus Goliath, and you can talk about that. I'll get out of the way and you talk about the actual campaign, because it's one of the most fascinating parts of the book. There's a lot of them, but this is one of my favorites.
Well, the in 2018, I was hitting 55 years of age. I had 32 years on the job already. I already had bought back all my military time, academy time. So I was basically sitting on almost 35 years of service, 90% retirement. And I tried 3 times under Sheriff McDonald. Hey, I'd like to interview for this job. And I picked jobs that I knew I'd be very competitive in based on my background and my education. And all 3 times they told me basically, pound stand, and who are you? I could not even interview for a job.
And by the way, Sheriff, it wasn't just under Jim McDonald; it was under the previous sheriff
Oh
and
yeah,
previous sheriff, right? In other
yeah,
words,
pretty
people
much.
try to interview. So and again, I kind of took you off track there, but this was, in other words, this is kind of a crescendo for you. It's like, okay, I've had it. It's not just the particular person that is really trying to keep me in line or keep me out of that elite, captain and above and things like this. This is a culture in the department. Is that fair to
Yes,
say?
that is exactly what it is. It
Okay,
was a
I wanted to
culture.
get that out there for the listeners. So go ahead.
It was a culture of cronyism, nepotism, tokenism, so to speak. And this was true during Baca's time. Under Block's administration, I was too young. I really wasn't aware of the inner workings that well. I knew there was some shady things, but more or less, the people that got up in the ranks were older people with a lot more experience. So I really didn't question it too much. It's when Baca came along and then he elevated Paul Tanaka. That's when the culture of the organization really became toxic. And it was you're in the car or you're not. And when McDonald was in office, I thought, okay, good. They're going to wipe the slate clean. They're going to start doing things the right way. But then 1, 2, 3 strikes, and it confirmed to me that the game was still alive and well. The player changed, but it was still the same game. So I had this long discussion with my wife as I was, I am retiring in February of 18. You know what? They can't block me from only one job on the department, and it's his job. There's nothing they can do if I run against him. So in 2017, while I was still working, I announced my candidacy in June of 2017, and I got the predictable, who does he think he is? He doesn't stand a chance, blah, blah, blah. The LA Times was laughing. Every time they talked about me, they talked about, it's impossible to defeat the incumbent, blah, blah, blah. But we just kept trucking on. And I retired February of 18. When campaigning full time, we just kept trucking on. And just as everybody kept saying, you can't do it, you can't do it. We out hustled everybody, and we understood there was a pathway. We captured lightning in a bottle and we ended up unseating the incumbent.
Yeah,
And
you
that was
did.
the
And just so you know, and I've we've talked about this a little bit before when we had you on the show, because I spent my entire life, except for going away to college, in Los Angeles County, and then my entire law enforcement career in Los Angeles County, which is one of the reasons I know so many of the people, the players in your book and in your story. But I too, Sheriff, we lived in the foothills of Altadena. By the way, the house that we used to live in partially burned, and the Eaton fire had survived, but it's kind of eerie looking back at that now. But I used to, ride my bicycle a couple of days a week, climbing a hill and going back to my house. And the way that I usually went, there were a couple of yard signs with this Alex Villanueva for sheriff, and just like you said, I took go, who is this guy? I did that a couple of times. So, God, who is this guy? So he doesn't have his chance. I know Jim McDonald, and by the way, been we've been very friendly for years. But I thought, who's this guy? Who's this guy? And and I tell people this just really to authenticate. Not that you need it, but here I am, and I was a high-ranking official of the Highway Patrol, and I knew a lot of the players in town, and I didn't know anything about you, like so many other people were completely ignorant about who this guy was. So when you say that, it's absolutely true. And the title of that chapter, David versus Goliath, could not be more appropriate.
yeah. So I was a Democrat, registered Democrat, still am, and I did on my homework and I went back through the history of the sheriff's department. And I realized for the last 130 plus years, since 1870, every single sheriff, even though it's a nonpartisan office, has been a Republican for 100 since 1870.
By the way, which I learned from your book.
It's like, wow, that is one incredible streak. I think we can change that. Not only because internally the need for change was obvious under McDonald, I think he's a good man at heart, but I don't think he understood the the infrastructure of the organization, the culture of the organization, and the needs of the organization. He tried to apply a square peg to a round hole. It did not fit, and the department started collapsing under him. People were leaving in droves. They were losing on average about 200 deputies a year were leaving that weren't replaced.
Yeah,
And
it's unsustainable.
And same thing happened in Long Beach, oddly, with Luna.
I have to say,
And it happened again with Luna in the department. Because, again, if you don't understand the nature of the beast, you cannot just go in there and start barking orders and think that your entire workforce is going to go along with you. They're not. They're going to sit on their hands. And so November of 18, we did the unthinkable. We won. I think there was one Times writer, one of their political commentary people. It's not that I have egg on my face. I have a whole omelet on my face. I remember that. And it was quite a shocking thing. And so we went about to do all the things I thought we need to do on the department to get it back on its feet. To my campaign motto was reform, rebuild, and restore. And we did all those things. And in the normal world, when you actually carry through and accomplish what you set out to, you campaigned on, usually you get reelected, except when the political establishment realizes that it's better to have a sheriff that we can control, that knows their place, than to have someone who's going to go willy-nilly and actually do the right thing. That's problematic.
It's an excellent point because, like you said, and I'm glad you made the point that you were and still are a registered Democrat. And of course, Los Angeles County is run by the Democrat establishments, heavily Democrat. And so you would think that you would be a good fit. But the difference was you were a Democrat who was also an independent thinker and somebody who believed in the rule of law and right and wrong. I say that because whether you're Republican or Democrat, independent, conservative, liberal, whatever, it doesn't guarantee anything when it comes to right or wrong. Those are individual values. Now, those of us in a particular party, whatever, we hope that whatever our values are, that our party, we're in line with our party, with their values, we're a member of those things. But on an individual basis, and we can talk about the Board of Supervisors, and we will, it still comes down to, in this case here, and I think in a lot of cases, as you said, who is controllable in this situation? And I think you're 100% right. So, like everybody else, I like almost everybody else, I was shocked when you won, and I didn't know anything about you. And like everybody else, I'm reading Los Angeles Times, really only because I wanted to see what the other side was doing. I'm not a fan of Los Angeles Times, but obviously there's a lot in there about the Highway Patrol, things like this. So I was reading this. And I'm reading the same articles. I'm watching the same, Fox 11, the local Fox station in Southern California, Los Angeles, and NBC and KTLA. I'm watching and I'm reading and I'm listening to the same stuff that the other people in Los Angeles County and California are listening to. I'm thinking, God, what's wrong with this guy? Blah, 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 or whatever. Because I was being, quite frankly, as lazy as everybody else who was starting to turn a cold shoulder to you. Because I was only hearing this through the lens of people who hated you.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have known better. I really should have known better. But that changed very quickly. And I became an outlier in my own circle of professional colleagues. I'm telling you right now, Sheriff. Because, I said, hey, listen, I don't know what that is doing, blah, blah, blah. And early on, I was right along with the crowd. But when I started seeing actions, I thought, well, okay, well, he got that one right, whatever. Broken clock is, right twice a day kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there was another one, and there's another one. And then I started sitting up and paying attention. I said, you know what? Now, one of the things early on, and we'll talk about a couple of those things where I really start, moving over into your camp. Early on, there was a story that broke about a former, now reinstated deputy, Carl Mandonian. Is that right? Pronounce it. And I'll just set a stage a little bit here, and you can go ahead and fill the gaps in. But long story short, he had been dismissed from the department for a domestic violence charge. Is that correct?
Allegation.
Yeah, allegation. Thank you. Actually, it's so important. An allegation that was prior to your tenure. He was dismissed from the department from a domestic violence allegation. And I'm going to fast forward to the end. You can fill in the gaps here. You brought him back as sheriff. You brought him back. And that was one of the things I go, oh my God, what's this guy doing? A DV, domestic violence, blah, blah, blah. We fire those people and so forth and so on. Go ahead and fill us in on the particulars of what happened actually and why you brought him back.
Carl Mendoza case was part of McDonald's efforts at basically, he wanted to do mass terminations, fire as many people as possible. And that was pretty much the message that he gave to his constitutional policing advisor, Diana Taran.
Now, and we'll talk about Turin, but why? Can you explain to me into why do you think that was McDonald's intent, or strategy, or
Well, we tracked the number of termination, intent to terminate letters issued. He issued 400 in 4 years, right on the nose, 400, which is an incredible amount of terminations.
yeah, you told
And
me.
and then the guidelines for discipline of the department were altered. So virtually almost every violation of the policy, the range was increased to include termination on everything.
Wow,
So now you can see
that's
how
that's bizarre.
it is bizarre, because if you're walking around with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, which is
Yeah.
what they were doing. So Mandoyan is a deputy that I worked with when I was at Lennox as a sergeant. He was one of the deputies. In fact, he was a reserve deputy at the time. I thought he was a regular because he volunteered so often, but he was a reserve. He later became full-time deputy. He gets into a toxic relationship with a lady, and this is his mistake, which he acknowledges. When she lodged a complaint against him about 8 or 9 months after the fact, she had already lodged two additional complaints against two other deputies, accusing them of a sexual assault falsely to another police department. So Mandoyan was actually the third person that she'd accused. And this person, I don't know what their issue was, but apparently they were using somehow, this complaint process for some other issue. Hard to figure out what it was. But he gets the accusation. The department does an investigation. The department completes the investigation, and they acknowledge, they interview a witness who had exculpatory information that said, no, nothing happened, blah, 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 and I will testify to that. And that interview and that witness was concealed to the defense and to Mandoyan. Even though they interviewed them officially, record everything, they concealed an exculpatory witness, which right
Which
away that
yeah, it stinks to high heaven. Not to mention the fact that a lawyer can be disbarred for something that egregious.
yes. And not only that, when they put her on the stand in the civil service case to testify, they knew she was testifying to false information. So now you're actually increasing the problem. Now you have subordination of perjury.
Mm-hmm.
And so the internal affairs sergeant now could face potential criminal charges for that. And then it got worse. And turns out that the video evidence that was submitted, that was widely played on TV, was edited for dramatic effect. It represented less than 5% of the total number of videos they had. So you had edited evidence and you had a concealed exculpatory witness. That to me means that is a non starter. In spite of all that, they were going to give him 11 days off. That was it. Because they concluded basically, okay, these are the policies violated. But Diana Taran told the investigators, give me two findings. Give me one for termination and write me up another one for the 11 days. And then when she gives it to the division chiefs who make the decision, she only showed the termination one. So the division chiefs go, okay, termination. So she played it basically to notch another one on her belt for a termination. So this information, Mandoyan relays it to us during the campaign. He was a volunteer for the campaign. And I told him, hey, you know what? We're going to have to verify this. If it's true, we can bring you back. But if there's facts that support the termination, you're going to stay terminated. And we had other people volunteered, and we looked at their cases and said, no, we can't bring you back. There's hard facts for that. So we brought him back, and then the board, and I explained to the board, this is all the facts. And little did I know, this is February of 2019. Little did I know that January of 19, 1 month into office, the board had already hired a law firm to sue me. 1 month in. And then I explained to them, you guys really screwed up here. This is misconduct from the McDonald administration, not McDonald himself, but from his administration, that we're trying to wrong or right a wrong. And they just ate. I remember it was in closed chambers, closed session. They're just eating their salads out of these plastic boxes, and they don't ask me a single question because they
And
already
see,
knew.
and pardon me for interrupting, but you illustrated that very well. And I have that image where they're sitting there. And this goes back to the arrogance of ALATs. Remember, I said earlier about arrogance. And when you see this type of dismissive, we don't need to listen to you. You don't need to see anything we do. Just do as you're told. I don't care if it's ALADs or if it's Congress or president, or this is indicative of tyranny. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I read that about them eating salads, I thought these people don't give a damn about anything other than their power and their ability to control people.
Yes, exactly.
So when you're going to continue,
For me, it's important to support my employees who are in the right and to hold them accountable when they're in the wrong. I have to be able to do both things. I can't do only one or only the other. Because if I only do one, like under Baca's administration, well, then you have the Tanakas of the world, you have the whole mess. If I do the McDonald's style, then we fire everybody and you're not supporting anybody in the way. So you got to be able to balance both things. That is the ultimate measure of a good sheriff, is being able to balance accountability and support for your staff.
well, it's a
And
measure
we
of a good
achieved,
leader, period.
yeah, and we
Good leader,
achieved
period.
that
Yes, you did.
because we had 17,000 employees who are now 17,000 recruiters. I didn't have to spend a dime in recruitment. We didn't have to because everyone was recruiting for us. Everyone said you can trust my employer with your son, your daughter, your loved one, your family, your friend. And that is the bond that was broken under McDonald, and it was broken twice as bad now under Luna. And that's why they can. And even now with McDonald in office as the LAPD chief, yesterday they graduated a class of 22.
Yeah, I
22.
have I have a lot of contacts over there, and I guess it's a topic for a different show. But I hear you. 22. I mean, in other words, this doesn't meet just normal attrition. People going out, retiring, legitimate injury, things like this, and dismissals. This doesn't come close to meeting the natural attrition of basically a 9,000, 10,000 officer or deputy organization. I mean, they're probably losing naturally, probably close to 40 or so a month, just naturally in LAPD, I would guess, somewhere around there, because Highway Patrol's around, 30 a month, give or take. So it's not sustainable. And just like we're seeing right now under the Luna administration, it's horrible. I mean, and we could talk about, for time's sake though, we're going to try to stay a little bit narrow, but because we could be here for 3 hours talking or more, probably 2 days about this. One of the things, and you talked about, they had really hired a law firm, to sue you really in your first month in your tenure there. And I'm saying, Sheriff, one of the number of topics they wanted to highlight, exhibiting how horrible you were as sheriff, was the allegation of out of control, rampant, ubiquitous Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy gang members. And so I want you to talk about that because, and again, I'm listening to this too, and I don't know any different. Okay, I guess they're doing investigations. In other words, when you hear that a body of elected officials and supervisors, things like this, the AG or the OIG in this case, are doing investigations, kind of naturally as a cop, you think, well, there must be some meat on the bone here if we have all these people that are
Mhm.
engaged in. In other words, it's a natural kind of thing. And so you kind of turn your back as an assistant chief or chief, and you're taking care of your daily business. And, well, boy, the sheriff's department's got a lot going on. These rogue deputies. Talk to us about the reality of the quote unquote sheriff's deputy gang members.
The reality is there are no deputy gangs. There never were deputy gangs. There never will be deputy gangs. What I have is any large organization like the sheriff's department. Occasionally, you have bad employees that do stupid things in uniform or out of uniform. And throughout history, it makes it no different from the LAPD, the NYPD, Chicago PD, CHP, any large organization. You're going to have the occasional bad actor.
Hey, by the way, I'm going to chime in here. We were probably worse than the sheriff's department because I can't remember, in the last 20 years, there was actually a California Highway Patrol officer in one of the stations in Los Angeles County. We found out somehow this guy got through the cracks. He got through the cracks, and he'd been in the job for a number of years, and he was still actively affiliated with an outlaw motorcycle gang, the OMG. We found out, and we did surveillance, blah blah, and arrested him for multiple felonies. You talk about egg in our face as a department, but that was one. In other words, out of all these, so that was a real gang member. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
We didn't find one in the sheriff's department,
and we do know that there are some gangs, and especially with the Mexican mafia, that they have a family member who is not inked up or anything, and they'll try to get him into law enforcement.
and that's, by the way, it's what happened with the Highway Patrol. They
Yeah.
actually tried to implant him. Yeah.
And we have found civilians who are active family members or spouses of outlaw motorcycle gangs of different Mexican mafia, for example. And we have the occasional person we find is an actual gang member that sneaks through the system, didn't raise any red flags, didn't commit any felonies that got him on the radar, and was able to bullshit their way through. And we uncovered one when I was in the academy as a drill instructor. And we found one. The only thing that tripped him up, he dropped his ID card at a crack house in Pasadena. His civilian, recruit thing.
Uh-huh.
And his whole thing fell apart there. But had he not dropped it, he probably would have graduated.
Yeah.
He had an 80+% average. He was doing what he needed to do to graduate. So they're there. But in 2022, Cal State LA did a research effort on the issue of subgroups, tattoos, and misconduct. And they found there is no correlation between deputy tattoos and misconduct. Ouch. So the entire thing is a political campaign. A political campaign that was designed to obviously defund the sheriff's department, to basically starve it of the necessary resources, to smear me as the sheriff, because when McDonald was in office, there was no existential crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't hear this played out in the media. You didn't hear the Oversight Commission jumping up and down, or the Inspector General.
Or with Baca.
Or with Baca. And then I was the one that actually addressed the perception of it, put the first policy in play, did all the things I was supposed to do. And then, oh my God, for 4 years, all we heard was deputy gangs. As soon as I left office, the whole deputy gang narrative disappeared. It's no longer an existential crisis. What changed? Nothing. It was a game all along. And now the county is on the hook for $4 billion in a settlement for child abuse due to McLaren Hall. But they
explain that a little bit. Let's a little bit of detail to the viewers.
Yeah. The county has operated a home for foster youth. It was called McLaren Hall, and they could take babies up to, under the age of 18 in McLaren Hall. And they closed, I want to say, about 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And the issue is just like probation today, lack of supervision, and they acknowledge that they never did background checks on the people who worked at McLaren Hall. So you had a bunch of Chester the molesters working McLaren Hall, and now you have 6,800 victims or alleged victims claiming that they were molested in McLaren Hall. Hence the $4 billion settlement that was just announced today. It's in the LA Times. That is a record, a national record, $4 billion. So here's the problem. The county settled the case on deputy gang claim and their fake claims, and they paid $8 million on a fake claim. Now you got 6 to 8, and a good chunk of them are going to be real. I know there's some be phony ones and they're trying to milk the system, but
correct.
the bulk of them, I'm pretty sure they're going to have some legitimacy behind them. Hence the $4 billion. And this
It's
is
so perverse, and I say perverse, not just the Chester molesters that are responsible for abusing these poor children, but it's so perverse that the same county elected officials were targeting you for doing certainly what you believe and I believe were the right things by your department and the citizens and residents of the county of Los Angeles. But they are responsible for this ultimately. These are the people that turn a blind eye, or maybe even worse, as far as knowledge, or just being almost willfully just dismissive. Well, I guess that's redundant, of their responsibilities of oversight. We talk about $4 billion. I'll say this, and there's probably appeals, things like that. But however, whatever the sum of that original $4 billion turns out to be, that's paid out, and maybe it'll be all of it. At least we'll know where that went. Okay, it went out out of a lawsuit. But this takes us into the next topic I want to talk about, because you talk about high profile, and not only in a region, a county, but nationally. And that's how you dealt with homelessness. And the reason I say, well, we know where that $4 billion went. There's $20+ billion for the last 5 years. We have no idea what in the hell happened to that was supposed to be funding these NGOs, these charities that are supposed to be, trying to eradicate or mitigate the homeless problem. And we know that money went someplace and it went to somebody's pockets. But when you got into office, I mean, it was very quick. And I'll tell you right now, Sheriff, this is one of the things when I talk about the Carl Mandoyan issue. I'm thinking, this guy like rehired a guy who was, allegedly responsible in this domestic violence, blah, blah, blah. But when I started seeing how you were dealing with the homeless problem, and this is compound, that was the first part. And this includes places outside of unincorporated Los Angeles County. And I'm going to start with Venice Beach. When I saw first you taking action, and just so everybody knows, Venice Beach is part of the city of Los Angeles. It's LAPD's responsibility. But Sheriff, you can speak for yourself, but you're saying, hey, I'm the sheriff for everybody in the county of Los Angeles, and I'm going to fight crime and try to mitigate social issues that, wherever I can, wherever I need to. But the second part of this is when I saw the desperate pushback about your proactive actions from your biggest detractors. I said, this is when my light bulb went on. Okay. This is when my light bulb went on. I said, wait a minute. Why in the hell would the Board of Supervisors, or, this newspaper, this publication, why are they angry with this guy who's simply going in trying to clean up a mess that apparently everybody agrees is a problem, and we're spending billions of dollars and it's only getting worse? Why are they angry at him? So when I start asking my own questions, that's when I start really, really moving your campus. You know what? I'm following this guy. I'm going to watch him now because I'm happy with what he's doing, and he must be doing it for a reason that's pissing off the people who are running this county. So I know it was kind of, I'm on a soapbox there, but that's when I got angry, Sheriff. This is when I got angry. I said, damn it, give the guy some credit. He's trying to do what everybody says they want to do. When he does it, you push back. I mean, you, Board of Supervisors and other entities, so I'm talking about. So go ahead.
No, it's very true. We were getting buried with complaints, emails, letters, videos. Heck, there was a guy, a German in Venice. He had a YouTube channel, and he was putting all of the horrendous things that were going on in Venice. Tents be set on fire, people stabbing each other, shooting each other, a house burning down, set ablaze by a homeless person in an alley, and a dog burned to death. And the screams of the dog is just horrible. And I told my folks, you know what? We're going to go over there, see what the hell is going on. This is intolerable. And when we got there, it was as bad as they advertised, if not worse. You could not see the ocean from the boardwalk. Just think of that. You're literally on the boardwalk. You couldn't see the ocean because it was a line of pop-up tents that covered the entire expanse of the boardwalk from north to south, from the edge of Santa Monica all the way down to, I don't know where the end is over there, about a half a mile worth of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we So we started talking. We had our homeless outreach service team. They did their assessments and they did their business. They started connecting people with services. Prior to us going there with a full host team, our narcotics bureau went there in uniform. They made 59 arrests. They served multiple search warrants. They were hauling drug dealers to jail left and right, and they were in shock because they were like, "But you're sheriff, like, but you can't be here." And it was comical. I mean, and these guys, they were so used to not being jammed by law enforcement. The deputies, I mean, they'd have their beard on, but they'd have a Class B uniform in a black and white. They drive up to a hand-to-hand exchange, and they'd arrest a dope dealer right there on the spot, and they were in shock. And right away, Sheila Kuehl, you're right. She says he just sauntered onto the boardwalk with that cowboy hat. Doesn't he know his jurisdiction? And of course,
Doesn't
my
she?
response was, "Yeah, it's LA County. It says LA County. It doesn't say parts of LA County. It's all of LA County." And it turns out the state constitution actually has the authority, the sheriff, to do exactly what I did, especially when there's lawlessness, when there's a need for reestablish law and order. And I know Mike Moore got a little huffy when I went onto his, but the Pacific Division officers, God bless them, they were so thankful for us because they were being harassed and being bullied by people who thought, "Oh, you can't do anything," because Mike Bonin, the councilman, and Mike Moore have already said we're not going to do anything. I said, "Bullshit." Venice is the number 2 tourist destination in all of Southern California after Disneyland. LA County gets $18 billion a year from tourism. How in the hell am I going to allow our number 1 tourist destination to fall apart because people don't have a clue or have no desire to intervene and prevent this tragedy from unfolding? All the businesses,
Yep.
more than half of them were shuttered.
Mm-hmm.
The street performers were gone. They were afraid to show up on the boardwalk. There were no tourists. There was only a few cyclists, and they were going scared real fast.
Yep.
In their spandex and their clip-ons, and they
Yeah.
wouldn't slow down.
Don't be too hard on cyclists. I'm one of them, and I used to be down there in my spandex. But anyway, but go ahead.
I've done the spandex routine myself, but I just valor CrossFit more now than cycling. But so we intervened. We pushed back against Mike Bonin. He had a big hissy fit.
Oh boy, do I remember?
It
Yes,
was comical.
it was.
And then this was in June, Labor Day that same year. I think this is 2021 now. Labor Day of that year, we went back to the boardwalk after the cleanup. Oh my God, it was night and day. The boardwalk was clear. The odor of rotting bodies and feces was gone. You could see and smell the ocean breeze and see the ocean. The performers were back. The tourists were back. All the shops that were boarded up were open. There was tourists everywhere. And every single place we went to, people were, "Oh, thank you. We appreciate that you came here." Notice how Sheila Kuehl didn't bother talking to them,
No, of
and
course
they're
not.
her constituents. But they did tell us thank you and please, and everyone wanted to feed us. Like, "Oh, we can't do that. We can only eat at one place at a time." But we really appreciated it. They just threw the red carpet out for us.
Well, and understandably, and this is what a public servant, especially law enforcement, is supposed to do. The first thing, obviously, is public safety, but it's also quality of life issue, and that's exactly what you were dealing with. There's quality of life. You talked about those businesses that were boarded up on the boardwalk and the tourism, but it made people not only feel safer, it made people safer, and it made people happier. And Sheila Kuehl, I mean, that's a topic for another show onto itself, but as we wind down here, and we will actually probably hit, touch on Sheila Kuehl, pardon that phrase, on that topic here before we close shop. But the Board of Supervisors, we've talked about them kind of in an ancillary way here throughout the show. But if you could, Sheriff, just give us a couple of examples, because we there's so many players here. There's so many players, and I'll throw this in here, ladies and gentlemen. You got to, if you don't know what collusion is, you've got to read this book. We talk about the media, elected officials, bureaucrats. It's sickening. But the Board of Supervisors, talk a little bit about the lawfare that they were involved in against you and your administration, in a concise way, if you can. I mean, just for time's sake.
Well, I can tell you real simply, The Oversight Commission, the Inspector General, never produced any document or any study of anything that had any value for the organization. Everything was a gotcha, oh my God. But okay, I need to know about our entire system. Is it working or is it not working? Don't tell me about this one case that you heard from an LA Times reporter that you want to blast it on. No, I need to know, is our service comment report system working? Do we need to tweak it? Investigations on homicides or deputy involved shootings? Please tell us where we're going wrong. Don't try running around claiming that we're obstructing the inspector general. They don't do criminal investigations. We do them. All they can do is evaluations of investigations.
That's
It's
right.
really about all they can do. They are not doing criminal investigations. Yet they sold that to the public and to the Board of Supervisors. They sold the same idea that somehow they were doing investigations that were criminal, and we were the suspects.
You know what? I got to ask you a question about that. It's a really good point. Do you really think that the Board of Supervisors believed they were doing criminal investigations, or they just kind of turned a blind eye and accepted the crap? In other words, were they that stupid about what the law says?
There's an argument to be made on both sides. They're
Yeah,
that stupid, or they knew what they were doing was bad. They knew they weaponized every component of county government possible to throw at me.
they sure did.
I can't think of anything they ever did to say, hey, Sheriff, what do you need? How can we help you do your job? That never happened in 4 years. Never. However, in 40 years of board motions, I had my personnel do a deep dive on this. We went back 40 years of board motions. 80% of all the negative motions against the sheriff's department happened on my watch. And
It's
that's over 4
impossible.
decades. Yeah, it's literally impossible.
It's impossible. It's just impossible. By the way, in the light of no criminal charges were ever brought or substantiated or administrative. In other words, you would think, okay, well, 80%, if you have Attila the Hun or Charles Manson running the sheriff's department, well, yeah, then okay, that would make sense. But nothing ever came of it.
In fact,
Nothing ever came of it.
you don't even know how bad it was. 2 criminal investigations against me. Gascon, when he was a DA, he put together 2 criminal grand juries to go after me.
Well, I believe you talk about one of those in the book. Am I wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you talk about
Well,
one
there
of
was
those.
2 of them.
Yeah, I didn't know about the second one. You're right. Okay.
The attorney general, that pattern and practice, that was
Mhm.
all. I was a target. Hey, let's put an anchor around his neck and let him swim. They came up empty-handed.
Of course they did.
The
Otherwise, we know
FBI,
about it.
yeah, the FBI again and again, they were hit up. Oh, you got to investigate the sheriff, blah, blah, blah. Empty-handed. All these investigative reporting from the LA Times, they were activists who were pretending to be reporters, and they came up empty-handed, all of them. So
Well, by the way, as you so correctly call the LA Times, nothing but a scribe for the county board of supervisors.
pretty much.
Yeah, and
In fact, we even measured their coverage in the Times. We compared the 4 years of McDonnell against my 4 years in office. Remember, it's the same organization, it's the same people, the same rules, and it was night and day coverage. And you could tell where they basically switched to activist mode. Their coverage that was negative went from like 30% of articles to like 96%. And it quadrupled in size the number of articles. Like in one case, the San Fernando Valley Court lockup use of force case,
yeah, yeah.
12 stories on that one case, and the whole thing was fake. And when we produced all the facts and the evidence, they never reported on it.
No, of course not. I mean,
Every lawsuit that I won in court, you never hear about it.
they never report on the exculpatory things that related to you, administration. It's it's quite a tale, and I have more topics on here, but in the interest of time, we're going to wind things down. But there's so much there's so much to this book, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I highly encourage you to read this. And again, it's Sheriff, Holding the Thin Blue Line in a Deep Blue State. I mean, that's exactly what the man on the screen right there did. And for 4 years, I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful that I was open-minded enough to, after initially, to sit back and give you a chance. And I was very, very proud to have you as my sheriff. And by the way, Sheriff, there are a lot of people that I'm very close to that probably are going to not like me for it, but I couldn't care less, because I've read the book, I watched your actions, and that's all I care about. I care about behavior in people. That's about it. Other than that, it's all ancillary and meaningless to me. And your behavior, I think your actions were fantastic. I wish we had more sheriffs and leaders in law enforcement like you. So with that said, I can't thank you enough. I will have you on again, because there's always something coming up that you are the best person in the world to address. So with that said, I'd like to thank the former Sheriff Alex Villanueva for joining us again. Gentlemen, thanks for watching Your Leo Nation. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you click, you watch the stuff, and you share it. And make sure you get this book. Damn it, you got to get this book. I'm not getting anything for it. I wish I was, but I'm not. And enjoy that. Sheriff, God bless you. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. All right.
It's all my
Bye-bye.
pleasure.